15 years of marriage is a long time. It's enough time to build something solid, or so I thought. It's enough time for life to get busy, for passion to turn into partnership, for spontaneous weekends to become predictable routines. It's also enough time for small cracks to form without you noticing. I didn't see the cracks at first. We were comfortable in our life together. We had our routines, our habits. There were no fiery arguments or dramatic storms. Just the kind of marriage that settled into steady, predictable patterns. We worked hard, took weekend trips when we could, and always made time for the occasional date night. I thought it was enough, but looking back, the signs were there. Started small. Monica began dressing differently, more stylish, more polished. New clothes, new perfume. At first, I loved it. She seemed happy, radiant even. I told myself it was just her wanting to shake things up, maybe feel more confident. Then came the late nights at work. "We're landing a huge account," she explained. "It's been crazy at the office." I believed her because why wouldn't I? She worked in marketing, and I knew how demanding her job could be. But soon, late nights turned into weekends. Networking events, she called them, brushing it off with a quick kiss and a promise that it wouldn't always be like this. I trusted her, at least at first. I remember the first moment that trust wavered. It was a Wednesday night, and she had gone out for another work dinner. I was home, scrolling through my phone, waiting for her to come back, when her phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at the screen. "Looking forward to seeing you again. I'll book the suite, same as last time. G. Donovan." Time seemed to slow down as I read the message. "Suite? Same as last time?" I picked up her phone, my hands trembling. The message was still there, taunting me. I had never heard of G. Donovan. I scrolled through her messages, but it was the only one. Everything else was wiped clean. I stared at the phone for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. 100 scenarios flashed through my head, each one worse than the last. When I heard her car pull into the driveway, I quickly put the phone back on the table, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Hey," she said, walking into the living room with that same effortless smile. "How was your evening?" "Quiet," I said, forcing a smile. "Yours?" "Exhausting," she sighed, slipping off her heels. "We're this close to closing the account, though, so it'll be worth it." I nodded, watching her closely. She seemed normal, calm, not like someone hiding a secret. For a moment, I wondered if I was reading too much into it. Maybe the message meant nothing. Maybe G. Donovan was just a colleague, and I was letting my imagination get the better of me. But something about it gnawed at me. I didn't say anything that night. Instead, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the message in my head over and over again. The following week, I decided to test the waters. "So, how's work going?" I asked one morning over breakfast. "You've been putting in a lot of hours lately." Monica smiled, sipping her coffee. "Busy but good. It'll slow down soon, I promise." "Any interesting new clients?" I pressed, trying to keep my tone casual. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but enough to send a chill down my spine. "Nothing too exciting," she said quickly. "Just the usual." I nodded, pretending to accept her answer. But inside, my suspicion grew. A few nights later, I got my answer. Monica had another work dinner. I told her I'd be working late too, but instead, I drove downtown and parked across the street from her office. I watched as she walked out of the building, dressed in a sleek black dress, her hair perfectly styled. She didn't look like someone heading to a casual work dinner. I followed her as she drove across town, my heart pounding with every turn. She pulled into the valet at an upscale hotel, handing her keys to the attendant with a practiced ease that made my stomach churn. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I watched her walk through the glass doors without hesitation, disappearing into the lobby. For a moment, I considered confronting her right then and there, but something stopped me. I needed proof. I needed to know exactly what was going on before I made a scene. I waited 10 minutes, then walked into the hotel. The lobby was quiet, the air scented with fresh flowers and polished wood. I approached the front desk, trying to look calm. "Excuse me," I said to the clerk. "My wife just checked in, Monica Reynolds. Could you tell me what room she's in?" The clerk smiled politely. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't give out that information." Of course, I should have known. But as I turned to leave, I spotted her, stepping into the elevator with a tall man in a tailored suit. He placed a hand on the small of her back, leaning in to whisper something that made her laugh. My breath caught in my throat. I watched the elevator doors close, taking them away together. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my mind a swirling mess of anger and disbelief. I kept replaying what I had just seen. The way she leaned into him, the laugh, his hand on her back like it belonged there. I felt like a stranger in my own life. I sat in the living room, lights off, waiting for her to come home. The clock ticked away the minutes, each one stretching longer than the last. By the time I heard her car pull into the driveway, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. She walked in, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She froze when she saw me sitting there in the dark. "Oh," she said, forcing a smile. "You scared me. What are you doing up?" "Waiting for you," I said, my voice calm, too calm. Her smile faltered. "Why?" I stood up, crossing the room slowly. "Long day." She nodded, setting her purse down. "Yeah, that dinner dragged on forever."
I'm exhausted.
"Dinner," I repeated. "At a hotel?" Her eyes widened just a fraction, barely enough to notice, but I caught it. "What?" "I saw you," I said, my voice tightening. "At the hotel. With him." Her face went pale. "John, I can explain." "Then explain," I said, crossing my arms. "Explain why you were walking into a hotel with another man while I sat at home thinking you were at a work dinner." For a moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Then, finally, she sighed and sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice muffled. "Really?" I said, my anger rising. "Because it looked a hell of a lot like you were sneaking off with him." She looked up, tears in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen. Started months ago, he's a client and we got close. Too close. Too close," I repeated, my voice trembling. "That's what you're calling it?" "It was emotional at first," she said quickly. "We were just talking, connecting over work stress and other things, but it escalated. I didn't plan for it to go this far." "How far, Monica?" I asked, my voice cold. "How far did it go?" She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "That far," I said bitterly. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I paced the room, trying to process what she had just told me. I thought back to the message on her phone, the one about the suite. How many times had she been there with him while I sat at home? Oblivious? "How long?" I asked finally. Monica wiped her eyes, taking a deep breath. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months. An entire half-year of lies and secrets. "I can't believe this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "After everything we've been through, after everything we've built, how could you do this to me?" "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I was lost, and Greg made me feel alive again. I know that sounds awful, but I was in a dark place, and I made a terrible mistake." "A mistake," I said, laughing bitterly. "A mistake is something you do once, Monica, not something you keep doing for 6 months." "I know," she sobbed. "I know I've ruined everything, but I love you. I never stopped loving you. Please, give me a chance to make this right." Her words hung in the air like a weight pressing down on my chest. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she could fix this, that we could move past it somehow. But how do you move past something like this? The image of her with Greg was burned into my mind, seared into my memory like a scar I'd carry forever. "I don't know if I can," I said finally, my voice trembling. Monica collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. I stood there, watching her fall apart, feeling a strange mix of sadness and anger. "I need time," I said, turning toward the door. "I need to think." "John, wait." But I didn't wait. I walked out of the house, the cool night air hitting me like a slap in the face. I drove aimlessly for hours, my thoughts racing in 1,000 directions. I thought about our wedding day, the vows we had made, the life we had built together. How could it all fall apart so quickly? I thought about calling a friend, but what would I say? How do you explain something like this without sounding pathetic? Eventually, I found myself parked outside a 24-hour diner. I sat there for a while, staring at the neon sign buzzing in the window. I felt like a ghost, a hollow version of the man I had been just a few hours earlier. I pulled out my phone and stared at the lock screen, my thumb hovering over Monica's contact. Part of me wanted to call her to demand more answers, but the other part, the part that felt shattered beyond repair, knew it wouldn't make a difference. So I put the phone away and sat in silence. When I woke up the next morning, I was still in my car outside the diner. The harsh morning light streamed through the windows, and for a split second, I forgot everything that had happened the night before. But then it all came rushing back. The hotel, Monica's confession, her pleas for forgiveness. My stomach twisted. This wasn't something I could sweep under the rug or talk through in a single conversation. I needed answers, real answers, not the carefully curated version Monica had given me. Something about her story didn't sit right. 6 months? It felt like a lie of omission, like she was giving me just enough to pacify me without revealing the full truth. And then there was Greg, Donovan, the businessman, the man who had slipped into my life like a shadow, smiling while he stole my wife right under my nose. By the time I got home, Monica was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for me. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Hey," she said softly. "I was worried about you." I nodded, walking past her to pour myself a cup. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. "We need to talk," I said finally. She nodded, setting her mug down. "I know. Tell me everything," I said. "No more half-truths. No more edited versions. I want the full story." She took a deep breath, her fingers tapping anxiously on the table. "It started about a year ago," she said quietly. "Not 6 months. A full year." My jaw tightened. "A year," I repeated. "You told me 6 months last night." "I know," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I was scared to tell you the whole truth. I didn't want to hurt you any more than I already had." "Too late for that," I said coldly. Monica wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. "At first, it was just business. Greg was a client and we worked closely on a few projects. But he was charming and he made me feel noticed. I didn't realize how much I missed that feeling until it happened." "And then what?" I asked, my voice low. "How did it go from business to booking hotel suites?" Her face crumpled. "It happened gradually. We started meeting for coffee, then dinner. We talked about everything, work, life, our pasts. Felt easy, like we understood each other. And then one night, it crossed a line. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to yell. Crossed a line, how? Her silence was answer enough. I stood there, my mind reeling. A year. She had lied to me for an entire year, living a double life while I carried on like a fool, believing everything was fine. But something about her story still felt incomplete. "What else aren't you telling me?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Nothing," she said quickly. Too quickly. I studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right," I said. "If you're telling me the whole truth, then you won't mind if I call Greg and ask him to confirm it." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "No, you don't need to do that." "Why not?" I said, leaning in. "If it's just as you said, there's no harm in getting his side of the story, right?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I nodded, my suspicion hardening into certainty. She was still lying. Later that day, while Monica was out, I sat down at my computer and pulled up our phone records. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew there had to be more. It didn't take long to find it. Greg's number was everywhere. Daily calls, late-night texts, even weekend conversations when she was supposedly working on a campaign. But there was something else. Another number, one I didn't recognize, kept popping up around the same times. I stared at it, my mind racing. Who else was she talking to? I copied the number and did a reverse search. Nothing came up. No name, no business listing, just a blank slate. My stomach twisted. Was she talking to someone else, too? Or was this connected to Greg in a way she hadn't mentioned? That evening, I confronted her again. Who else have you been talking to? I asked, holding up the phone records. She frowned. What are you talking about? This number, I said, pointing to the screen. It shows up just as often as Greg's. Who is it? Her face paled. John, please, let's not do this again tonight. I stepped closer, my voice rising. Who is it? Monica pressed her lips together, her eyes darting toward the door. It's a friend, she said finally. Someone I talked to about work stuff. Another friend, I said, laughing bitterly. You sure have a lot of those lately. It's not like that, she said, her voice desperate. I swear. Then prove it, I said, my heart pounding. Call them right now. Put it on speaker. For a moment, I thought she might do it. She reached for her phone, her hand trembling, but then she stopped. I can't, she whispered, and just like that, the last shred of trust between us crumbled. After Monica's refusal to call the mystery number, something inside me snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't demand answers. I simply walked out of the room, grabbed my jacket, and left the house. I needed air. I needed time to think. I drove aimlessly for an hour, my mind racing. The second number gnawed at me. Who was it? Was she protecting someone? Or was it another thread in the tangled mess Monica had spun? As much as I wanted to believe her story, the evidence was stacking up against her. Greg wasn't just some client she got too close to. There was more. Something she wasn't telling me. I decided right then and there that I wasn't going to rely on Monica for the truth. If she wouldn't tell me, I'd find out myself. The next morning, I called a private investigator. His name was Carl, and he came highly recommended by a friend who'd gone through a messy divorce. I told him everything: Greg, the phone records, the hotel. He listened carefully, taking notes without interrupting. So, what exactly do you want me to find out? Carl asked when I finished. Everything, I said. I want to know who that second number belongs to. I want to know how long she's been seeing Greg. I want to know if there's anyone else. Carl nodded. All right, give me a few days. I'll be in touch. For the next 72 hours, I barely slept. I kept replaying every conversation I'd ever had with Monica, trying to spot the lies hidden between her words. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, hoping it was Carl with an update. Finally, on the fourth day, my phone rang. John, Carl said, I've got something you're going to want to see. Can you meet me at my office? I was there in 20 minutes. Carl greeted me with a manila folder in hand, his expression grim. It's bigger than you think, he said, sliding the folder across the desk. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first thing I saw was a photograph: Monica sitting at an outdoor cafe with Greg. They weren't alone. Sitting across from them was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, mid-40s, with dark hair and a serious expression. That's the owner of the second phone number, Carl said. His name's Richard Stanton. He's a real estate developer and a known associate of Greg Donovan. Associate? I asked, my stomach tightening. Carl nodded. They've worked together on several projects. But here's the interesting part: Richard has a history of shady business dealings. Fraud, shell companies, offshore accounts. He's been investigated a couple of times, but nothing ever stuck. What does this have to do with Monica? I asked, confused. Carl leaned back in his chair. I think your wife might be involved in something bigger than an affair. Greg and Richard have been meeting with her regularly, at hotels, cafes, private offices. It's not just about romance, John. There's something else going on here. I stared at the photos and phone records, my mind spinning. This wasn't what I had expected. I came here looking for proof of an affair, but now it seemed like Monica might be wrapped up in something far more dangerous. Do you think she's part of whatever business they're running? I asked. It's possible, Carl said, but I can't say for sure without digging deeper. I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. Do it. I want to know everything. When I got home that night, Monica was waiting for me again. Where were you? She asked, her eyes wary. Out, I said, brushing past her. She followed me into the kitchen. John, please, we need to talk. Do we? I said, turning to face her. Because every time we talk, you give me half-truths and lies. So why bother? She flinched, tears welling up in her eyes. I know I've messed up, but I'm telling you the truth now. I swear. I laughed bitterly. You're still hiding something. I know it and you know it. And when I find out what it is, we'll see how much of your story holds up. Monica's face crumpled. I'm not hiding anything else, she said, her voice breaking. Please, just give me a chance to prove it. But I was already walking away. The next few days were a blur of tension and silence. Monica tried to act normal, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She was nervous, always watching me out of the corner of her eye, as if waiting for me to confront her again. And I would. I was just waiting for the right moment. The silence in our house had grown unbearable. It clung to the walls like smoke, heavy and suffocating. Every conversation with Monica felt like walking through a minefield. Every glance a test of how much we could both pretend life hadn't already fallen apart. But I wasn't pretending anymore. I knew it was only a matter of time before Carl called again. Until then, I watched Monica closely, taking mental notes, analyzing every word she said for inconsistencies. I was on edge, waiting for the next shoe to drop. And then it did. Carl called late on a Thursday evening. His voice was calm, but there was a tension beneath it that set my nerves on fire. John, we need to meet. I found something big. I agreed without hesitation, driving straight to his office. When I arrived, he had another manila folder waiting for me. You were right to dig deeper, Carl said, sliding it across the desk. Monica's involvement with Greg and Richard Stanton isn't just personal. It's financial. Financial, I repeated, opening the folder. Inside was a stack of documents, bank statements, business filings, and what appeared to be transaction records from an offshore account. Monica's name was listed on several of them, along with Greg's and Richard's. They've been funneling money through a series of shell companies, Carl explained. It looks like a money laundering operation. Your wife's signature is on at least 3 documents authorizing transfers to these accounts. My head spun. Are you saying she's part of a criminal operation? It looks that way, Carl said grimly. Whether she knew the full extent of what she was signing is another question. But legally, she's implicated. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. This wasn't just an affair. This was something far more dangerous. I closed the folder, my hands shaking. What do I do now? Carl leaned back in his chair. You have 2 choices. Confront her and see if she tells you the truth, or go to the authorities. But if you go that route, be prepared for fallout. They'll investigate everything, including your finances. I nodded slowly. I'll handle it from here. When I got home, Monica was sitting in the living room, flipping through a magazine. She looked up when I walked in, her smile faltering at the sight of my expression. John, she said cautiously, is everything okay? I dropped the folder on the coffee table in front of her. Why don't you tell me? Her eyes flickered with confusion, then fear, as she opened the folder and saw the documents inside. Where did you get this? She whispered, her voice trembling. That's not the question you should be asking, I said, my voice cold. The question is, how long have you been laundering money with Greg and Richard? Her face went pale. John, I can explain. Can you? I snapped. Because I'd love to hear how you accidentally signed off on multiple offshore transactions with 2 known fraudsters. Tears welled up in her eyes. I didn't know what I was signing, Greg told me it was just business paperwork, something routine for the campaign we were working on. I trusted him. You trusted him? I said bitterly. More than you trusted me? It wasn't like that, she sobbed. I thought it was legitimate. By the time I realized something was off, it was too late. I was in too deep. If I had said anything, they would have ruined me. Ruined you? I said, my voice rising. They've already ruined you, Monica. You're part of a criminal conspiracy. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said, her voice breaking. I was scared, John. I didn't know how to get out. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But after all the lies, how could I? How far does this go? I asked quietly. Is there anyone else involved? How much money are we talking about? She hesitated, wiping her eyes. It's bigger than you think, she admitted. Greg and Richard have been doing this for years. They're careful, but they're not untouchable. My stomach sank. So what happens now? I don't know, she said. But if they find out you're digging, it won't end well. For either of us. Her words hung in the air, chilling me to the bone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, staring at the folder on the coffee table, trying to figure out what to do. If I went to the police, Monica could go to prison. But if I stayed silent, I'd be complicit. There was no easy way out of this. All I knew was that Greg and Richard weren't going to let this go quietly. And neither was I. I couldn't shake Monica's final words that night. If they find out you're digging, it won't end well. For either of us. The warning played in my head on repeat, keeping me up well into the early hours of the morning. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the fact that she was right or the fact that she seemed genuinely terrified. By the time dawn broke, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to wait for Greg and Richard to make their move. If they thought they could threaten me and get away with it, they were dead wrong. It was time to confront Greg directly. I knew where to find him. Greg's office was in one of those sleek downtown high-rises with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist decor. He always struck me as the kind of man who thrived on control. Every detail of his life carefully curated, right down to the cut of his suits. But today, I wasn't interested in his polished image. I wanted answers. When I walked into the building, the receptionist looked up with a practiced smile. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Greg Donovan," I said, my voice calm but firm. "No appointment." Her smile wavered. "Mr. Donovan is in a meeting. I'll wait," I said, brushing past her toward the elevator. I hit the button for the top floor, my heart pounding as the elevator doors slid shut. This was reckless, I knew that. But after everything I had discovered, I wasn't in the mood for caution. Greg's office was as pristine as I had imagined. Modern, cold, and utterly impersonal. He was standing by the window when I walked in, his back to me, his phone pressed to his ear. He glanced over his shoulder, raising an eyebrow when he saw me. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone before hanging up. "Well," he said, turning to face me, "this is unexpected." "Cut the crap," I said, stepping closer. "We need to talk." Greg smiled, that same smug smile I had seen before. "Talk about what?" "About Monica," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "And the little operation you've dragged her into." His eyes narrowed, but he kept his composure. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb," I snapped, tossing the manila folder onto his desk. "I've seen the bank records, the offshore accounts, the shell companies. I know everything." Greg's smile faded. He picked up the folder, flipping through the documents with a practiced eye. "Well," he said finally, setting it down, "it seems you've been busy. Busy enough to take you down," I said. "Unless you come clean right now." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same calm confidence. "You've got guts, John. I'll give you that," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But you're in way over your head. You think you can waltz in here, wave a few papers around, and make me confess? That's not how this works." "Then how does it work?" I asked, Greg chuckled, shaking his head. You're playing a dangerous game, my friend. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Try me, I said, my jaw clenched. Greg leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Walk away, John. Take Monica and disappear. This isn't a fight you can win. I stared at him, my blood boiling. Every fiber of my being wanted to punch him right there, to wipe that smug expression off his face. But I forced myself to stay calm. I'm not going anywhere, I said, turning toward the door. You'll be hearing from me again soon. Greg didn't respond. He just smiled, watching me leave with that same infuriating calm. When I got home, Monica was pacing in the living room, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She looked up when she saw me, relief flooding her face. Where have you been? She asked, rushing toward me. I've been calling you for hours. I went to see Greg, I said, brushing past her. Her face went pale. What? Why would you? Because I'm tired of playing games, I said, turning to face her. He knows I'm onto him, and he's scared. Monica shook her head, panic in her eyes. You don't understand. Greg doesn't get scared, he gets dangerous. If he feels threatened, he won't hesitate to protect himself. You should have stayed out of it. Stayed out of it? I said, my voice rising. You dragged me into this, Monica. You lied to me for a year, got involved in something illegal, and now you want me to sit on the sidelines. I was trying to protect you, she shouted, tears streaming down her face. I didn't want you to get hurt. Well, it's too late for that, I said bitterly. We're both in this now. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything that had happened hung between us like a heavy fog. Finally, Monica broke the silence. What do we do now? I took a deep breath, my mind racing. We're going to finish this, I said, but on my terms. No more lies, no more secrets. We take Greg and Richard down before they can get to us. Monica nodded, wiping her eyes. Okay, she whispered. I'm with you. But as I looked into her eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already in too deep. For the next few days, I barely left the house. Every conversation with Monica felt like a chess game. Each move calculated, every word chosen carefully. We both knew the stakes were higher than ever. I didn't trust Greg to stay quiet. If there was one thing I'd learned from watching him, it was that he always made the first move. He was a businessman, after all, calculating, ruthless, always 3 steps ahead. But this time, I was determined to stay 1 step ahead of him. Carl and I spent hours putting together everything we had. The bank records, the phone logs, the surveillance photos. It was enough to blow the whole operation wide open. But we needed one more piece of evidence. Something undeniable that would tie Greg and Richard directly to the illegal transactions. That's when Carl came up with the plan. We need a meeting, he said. A face-to-face where they incriminate themselves. We record it, take it straight to the authorities. No way they can talk their way out of that. I nodded. It was risky, but it was our best shot. Getting Greg to agree to a meeting was surprisingly easy. All it took was a single message. We need to talk. You're right. I'm in over my head. Let's work something out. Greg, tomorrow, noon, the warehouse on 6th Street. Come alone. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. A warehouse, of course. Greg didn't take chances. Not when there was so much on the line. I called Carl and told him the plan. He'd be nearby, recording everything from a safe distance. All I had to do was get Greg to talk. The warehouse was exactly what I expected. Large, dimly lit, and eerily quiet. I could hear my footsteps echoing on the concrete floor as I walked toward the center of the building. Greg was waiting for me, leaning against a stack of crates, his hands in his pockets. Richard stood a few feet behind him, his arms crossed, his eyes cold and unreadable. John, Greg said, flashing that same smug smile. Glad you could make it. I didn't have much of a choice, I said, keeping my voice steady. You were right. I'm in over my head. Greg chuckled. I usually am. So what's the plan? You disappear quietly, and we pretend none of this ever happened. Not exactly, I said, taking a step closer. I want a piece of the action. If I'm already implicated, I might as well get something out of it. His smile faltered for a split second. A piece of the action? 10%, I said. I stay quiet, you keep running your operation, and everyone wins. Richard scoffed. You're out of your mind. Am I? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Or am I exactly the kind of partner you need? Someone who knows how to keep secrets. Greg studied me for a moment, his eyes narrowing. And how do I know you won't run to the cops the second you leave here? Because I'd be risking everything, I said. Just like you. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of machinery. Then Greg nodded slowly. All right, he said. 10%. But if you even think about double-crossing me. He didn't have to finish the sentence. Deal, I said, extending my hand. Greg hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm, his eyes locked on mine. I walked out of the warehouse, my heart racing. Carl was waiting in his car a few blocks away, the recording device still running. Did you get it? I asked, sliding into the passenger seat. He nodded, holding up the recorder. Every word. I leaned back, exhaling for what felt like the first time in hours. We had him. We had them both. It was almost over, but I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. That night, I got a call from Monica. Her voice was trembling, barely audible over the sound of her breathing. John, she whispered, you need to come home. Now. What's wrong? I asked, already grabbing my keys. They know, she said, her voice cracking. They know about the recording. I drove like a madman, weaving through traffic, my heart pounding in my chest. Monica's voice echoed in my head. They know. How? We'd been careful. Carl was the best at what he did. There was no way Greg or Richard could have known about the recording, unless someone had betrayed us. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. When I pulled into the driveway, Monica was already waiting for me at the door. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. They called me, she said, her voice trembling. Richard said they know about the recording. They're coming for it. They're coming for us. For a second, I couldn't breathe. How do they know? Monica shook her head. I don't know. They must have someone watching us, or maybe someone tipped them off. I clenched my fists, rage bubbling up inside me. Carl, it has to be him. He's the only one who knew where I'd be. No, Monica said, her voice frantic. Carl's on our side. He wouldn't do this. Then how do you explain it? I snapped. How else would they know? Monica didn't answer. She didn't have to. We both knew there was no logical explanation, unless Carl had sold us out. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my stomach dropping when I saw the message. Unknown number. You have 24 hours to hand over the recording. If you don't, you'll regret it. I stared at the screen, my mind spinning. This wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. What do we do? Monica whispered. I looked at her, my jaw tightening. We finish what we started. The next day, I met Carl in a diner on the edge of town. The place was nearly empty, the hum of the fluorescent lights the only sound. You've got a problem, Carl said as I slid into the booth across from him. No kidding, I said, pulling out my phone and showing him the message. They know about the recording. Carl's eyes narrowed. That's not possible. I've kept everything locked down. No one outside of us could have known. Well, they do, I said. So either we have a leak, or they've been watching us the whole time. Carl leaned back, his jaw clenched. If they've been watching, we're already in deep trouble. But if someone leaked it... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I stared at him, my heart sinking. Do you think it's Monica? Carl didn't answer right away. She's in a tough spot, he said finally. If they pressured her hard enough, she might have told them something without realizing it. I shook my head. No. She's scared, but she wouldn't betray me. Not after everything we've been through. Then we need to act fast, Carl said. We've got a narrow window to make this right. You still have the recording. I nodded. It's safe. Good, he said. Then we need to get it to the authorities. Today, the plan was simple. We'd drive to the FBI office downtown and hand over everything. Greg and Richard would be out of our lives for good. But nothing ever goes according to plan. As we pulled out of the parking lot, a black SUV appeared in the rearview mirror. It stayed a few car lengths behind us, its windows tinted, its intentions clear. "They're following us," I said, my pulse quickening. Carl glanced in the mirror. "Stay calm. Don't speed. We'll lose them in traffic." But traffic was light, and no matter how many turns we took, the SUV stayed with us. "They're not giving up," Carl muttered. "Hang on." He took a sharp left, accelerating as we weaved through side streets. The SUV followed, its engine roaring as it closed the distance between us. My heart raced as Carl made another turn, tires screeching. We were heading toward the industrial part of town, where the streets were deserted and the buildings loomed like silent sentinels. "We need to ditch them," Carl said. "Now." I nodded, gripping the seat as he made one last turn, skidding into an alleyway and killing the engine. The SUV sped past, its brake lights flashing as it disappeared around the corner. We sat in silence for a moment, catching our breath. "That was too close," I said, my voice shaking. Carl nodded. "They're not messing around. We need to move fast." When we finally made it to the FBI office, my hands were still trembling. We handed over the recording, along with all the evidence we had gathered. The agent we spoke to listened carefully, his expression grim. "You did the right thing," he said as he took the folder. "We'll take it from here, but you should lay low for a while. These men aren't going to go down quietly." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and fear. It was almost over, or so I thought. That night, I got another message. "Unknown number. This isn't over. We're watching." I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. It was far from over. Couldn't sleep that night. The message from the unknown number was burned into my brain. "We're watching." It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. No matter how much evidence we handed over to the FBI, Greg and Richard weren't going to go down without a fight. I sat in the dark, staring out the window, every creak and shadow making my pulse quicken. Monica was asleep on the couch, her face drawn and pale. She hadn't said much after we got home. I could tell the fear was eating her alive. A part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything was going to be okay. But another part, the part still raw from months of lies, kept me rooted in place. The next day, everything exploded. I was in the kitchen, pouring myself a cup of coffee, when I heard a knock at the door. Not a gentle knock. A heavy, deliberate pounding that made the walls vibrate. I glanced at Monica. She froze, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't answer it," she whispered. But it was too late. The door burst open, and two men stepped inside. One of them was Richard Stanton. "Morning, John," he said, his voice calm, almost cheerful. "We need to have a little chat." I instinctively stepped in front of Monica. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. Richard smirked. "Oh, we'll leave. But first, you're going to tell us where the recording is." "It's already gone," I said. "The FBI has it. There's nothing you can do now." His smile faded. "You think we're afraid of the FBI? We've been playing this game a lot longer than you have. That recording won't see the light of day if we make the right calls." I clenched my fists. "Then why are you here?" "To tie up loose ends," Richard said, his eyes cold. Before I could react, Carl burst through the back door, his gun drawn. "Step back," Carl barked, aiming the weapon at Richard. "It's over." Richard raised his hands, his expression unreadable. "You sure about that?" Carl didn't waver. "Walk out the door. Now." For a moment, the room was filled with tense silence. Then Richard nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "We're leaving, but this isn't over." He turned to me, his eyes locking on mine. "You've made a powerful enemy, John. I hope you're ready for what comes next." They walked out, the door slamming behind them. Carl lowered the gun, his face grim. "They won't give up easily," he said. "But they're on the defensive now. We have the advantage." I nodded, my heart still racing. What do we do next? Stay low, Carl said. Let the FBI handle it from here. Don't engage with them again. No more hero moves. Got it, I said. For the next few weeks, life felt like a strange limbo. The FBI launched a full investigation into Greg and Richard's operation, but the case was complicated, tangled in years of hidden dealings and offshore accounts. We watched the news every night, waiting for an update. For the most part, it was quiet. Too quiet. Until the arrests came. It was a Tuesday morning when the headlines hit. Prominent businessmen indicted on fraud and money laundering charges. Greg and Richard's faces were plastered across every news channel. Monica and I sat on the couch, staring at the screen in stunned silence. "It's over," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's really over. But was it? I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe we could move on, leave all the lies and danger behind us. But deep down, I knew we'd carry the weight of this for a long time. Trust, once broken, doesn't come back easily." Monica tried. She poured herself into therapy, opened up in ways I never thought she would. She talked about the loneliness that had driven her to Greg, the fear that had kept her silent. It helped, but it didn't fix everything. One night, months after the arrests, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands folded in her lap. "I know you've forgiven me," she said quietly, "but I don't know if you'll ever trust me again." I didn't answer right away. I thought about everything we'd been through, the highs and lows, the lies and confessions. "I'm trying," I said finally, "but trust takes time." She nodded, a sad smile on her face. "I'll wait." And so we waited. Some days were easier than others. Some days felt like we'd found our way back to each other. Others felt like we were miles apart, still trapped in the shadows of the past. But we kept moving forward, one step at a time, because in the end, that's all you can do. The end.